We open Lincoln Calling 2020 with a keynote address entitled, "The Time is Now: How to Engage with Democracy and Empower Your Community." This program is brought to you by Humanities Nebraska, a statewide nonprofit organization inspiring and enriching personal and public life by offering opportunities to thoughtfully engage with history and culture with additional funding from the Nebraska Cultural Endowment. If you enjoy this type of programming, please consider supporting Humanities Nebraska with a contribution. Donations are matched by state and federal funds. Your support helps preserve our past and inform our future. Tonight's keynote address will be given by Ana Maria Archila, the co-executive director for the Center for Popular Democracy. Ana Maria Archila is a grassroots organizer, human rights leader, and a connector of communities. Ana Maria emigrated to the US from Colombia at the age of 17 and has become a leading voice for racial justice, economic justice, and immigrant rights in New York and nationally. First as the co-executive director of Make the Road New York, and now as the co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. During Ana Maria's 13 years at Make the Road New York and its predecessor organization, the Latin American Integration Center, Ana Maria helped build the organization into a powerful force for change in New York and across the country. The 16,000 plus members of Make the Road New York, mostly working class Latino immigrants, have led some of the most transformative victories for low-income New Yorkers over the last decade. With their determination and strong advocacy, members of Make the Road New York have helped put millions of dollars in the pockets of low-wage workers by winning increases to the minimum wage, paid sick days, and strong protections from wage theft. And they have led the ambitious campaigns to win public policies that make New York City one of the leading sanctuary cities in the country. Through their organizing efforts, Ana Maria and Make the Road New York members brought the experiences of immigrants to the forefront of the public debate, shaping public policy on housing, education, healthcare, policing, civil rights, and more. In 2014, Ana Maria Archila became co-executive director at the Center for Popular Democracy and helped build it into one of the largest community organizing networks in the country, with 45 affiliate organizations in 32 states. CPD and its affiliates represent a powerful, multiracial alliance of immigrants, African Americans, and white working class communities working to advance an agenda of racial and economic justice and a vibrant democracy. CPD and its affiliates have played a major role in the national movement to raise the minimum wage and win family-sustaining jobs, resulting in raises for close to 11 million workers. Working with local elected officials, Ana Maria and the CPD network has helped elevate the role of cities as a place for policy innovation that advances immigrant rights, workplace justice, and economic opportunity for communities of color. Following Ana Maria's keynote address, she'll be joined in conversation by her co-executive director at the Center for Popular Democracy, Jennifer Epps-Addison. Jennifer Epps-Addison serves as the president and co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy and CPD's action network of partner organizations throughout the country. As president, Jennifer leads CPD's racial justice campaigns and works closely with its networks of local affiliates. Jennifer has over 20 years of community organizing experience, advancing systems change campaigns for economic and racial justice. She earned her BA in political science and women's studies and her JD from the University of Wisconsin. Jennifer sits on the board of directors for the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, United for Respect, Be a Hero PAC, and Step Up Louisiana. Jennifer is a leader who has deep experience building power in communities from the ground up. She's committed to supporting and growing Black-led organizations, strengthening investments in power-building efforts in communities of color, and deepening organizing strategies that build power with the white working class by addressing racism head-on and building authentic alliances based on shared interests and shared values. Our moderator for the conversation is a local activist and organizer, Dr. Collete Yellow Robe. Dr. Collete Yellow Robe is an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne Tribe of Montana and is originally from the Winnebago Indian Reservation in Nebraska. She holds a PhD from the Teaching, Learning, and Teacher Education Department at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Dr. Yellow Robe is an academic counselor with the UNL TRIO program and primarily works with first-generation, low-income, and/or disabled college students. She is an active member in the community who is committed to social justice and alleviating poverty. Dr. Yellow Robe is a member of an anti-racist advisory board for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln administration. She serves on the Chancellor's Commission on the Status of People of Color at Nebraska. She's on the Mayor's Multicultural Advisory Committee for the City of Lincoln. And Dr. Yellow Robe is actively involved with Native American Women's Nebraska Task Force, working to bring awareness to and end the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. Following the moderated conversation between Ana Maria Archila and Jennifer Epps-Addison, Dr. Yellow Robe will take questions from our virtual live audiences. So please ask your questions throughout the program by entering them into the Facebook live stream comments. Dr. Koki will take it from there. Please enjoy this program, enjoy Lincoln Calling, and remember to engage. And now, Ana Maria Archila, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Ana Maria Archila, and it is my great honor to join you in the opening of 3 days of music and community and joy and celebration of our power as a people. I am especially grateful to be here because we are living in moments where joy could be perhaps receding in the background of fear and concern for the world, for our country, for our communities, for our families. It is true that we are living in really dark times. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. Our families are perhaps experiencing some of the worst economic crisis in their lifetime and in generations. We are seeing the realities of climate change in many corners of our country and the world. We are seeing also and experiencing directly the ravages of racism and violence and a democracy that is perhaps not working as it ought to work. And so when we hear all these things and we stare at this reality, it would be very normal for all of us to shut the doors, to gather only the smallest group of people we can take care of, and to say, I am just going to dedicate my energy to do what is in my control, to cook for the people I love, to watch a little bit of TV, to take my mind off of the heaviness of this moment. And that would be a totally rational thing to do. But I know that even when we do those things, for most of us, there is a voice inside that says, this can't be it. I can't just sit here and allow the world to happen to me without me engaging in trying to transform it. And the way that we can imagine transformation of this reality that feels dark and that feels difficult, that feels overwhelming, is to remember and reflect on the moments when we have felt quite the opposite, when we have felt kind of endless possibility and joy and lightness in our heart and hope and imagination. So when I was invited to speak as the keynote of this beautiful festival, this beautiful gathering of people around music and community, I first wondered, what do I have to say to a group of people that are gathering to listen to music? And especially, what do I have to say about civic engagement, which was the request? Talk to us about civic engagement. And what I have to say is that, especially in dark moments, it is essential for us to feed our soul with the things that give us joy so that we can recharge our batteries and so that we can remember that we are not alone, and that when we spend our energy in service of changing the world, we are doing it so that more of our time can be spent in community and in joy. So I want to ask you to think about this moment we are living in and reinterpret the darkness, not as something that is ending what we thought was possible, but as something that contains what is coming and that we are part of creating that. We are living in a moment that is historic in nature because of the multiple crises that we are confronting, and because actually all of us are invited to, with our actions, with our activism, with our votes, with the way we spend our energy, set the course for this country and help set the course for the world. So if you ever thought that you wish you had lived in the 60s and you wish you had been part of the moments of incredible activism on the streets, the fight against the war, or the fight for women's liberation, or the civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s, or the suffragist movement of the early 20th century, or the moments of emancipation, or the fights for the rights of Native American people, the movements of the 60s that brought the demands of Native American people into the modern discourse again. I want to tell you that you don't have to wait for those moments and just read about them. We are living through those moments right now. The COVID crisis has revealed the way, again, to many of us, the way that our society is structured, the way that it is constructed to make some of us more vulnerable. We know that the COVID virus and the economic fallout has not hit everyone equally. We know that Native American communities, working class people whose jobs are more precarious, Latino communities, Latinx communities, African American communities have been hit harder by the virus as well as the economic fallout. We also know that we are in a moment of, we are already in election season. All over the country, people are going out to vote. People are sending their ballots. And on November 3rd, many people will show up to an election booth in person. And this is a moment that will be incredibly decisive for our lives, for our country, for our future. And it would be normal to say, you know, I don't know if this election really will matter, or I don't know if I believe that I have a role to play here. And I want to remind you that in the moments of greatest transformation in our country and in the world, what made that transformation possible are people who showed up from wherever they were, in whatever shape they were, with whatever resources they had. And they said, today I am going to believe that I have power. Today I am going to believe that in community we can find joy and purpose. And it is really this idea that we, each one of us, contains the seed of transformation necessary to change the country, and the seed of optimism necessary to allow us to reinterpret the darkness and to think about it as not something that is ending, but something that at the end of it has a light. We can only understand darkness in contrast with the light ahead of us. So when we think about civic engagement, we're not talking about just like the formalities of democracy and just going out to vote ourselves. We're really talking about the many ways that we can take care of one another, the many ways that we can bring democracy alive for one another, the many ways that we can use our power to take care of the people we love, of our communities, and of our country. And it is really by thinking about it that way that it makes sense. Because if you think the power of one person's vote in the context of a country of 350 million, of course, the rational thing to say is it is a minimal thing. But when I go to vote, my children who are 8 and 5-year-olds see in that act, that choice I make that day, a choice that I consider important and that they themselves then can consider important. When I spend some of my energy calling an elected official to tell them that I am concerned about the eviction crisis that is impending, that I am concerned about the fact that people in my community are feeling very unsafe sending kids to school, but also feeling very strained by the inability to send kids to school. When I'm doing those things, I'm allowing my children to witness that I am just a person, but I am trying to do my very best to help represent their interests and to help take care of people in my community. So I want to invite us all to think about civic engagement as the way that we use democracy to build the country of our dreams. We know that we are here today with voting rights that were not available to many of us at the beginning of the founding of this nation. The fact that I can vote, the fact that women can vote, the fact that Black and brown people can vote, the fact that poor people can vote was not a given. It was the result of people in struggle. It was the result of people who could imagine in their minds something that they had not yet lived through, and who thought that they perhaps could move us as a people in the direction of that imagination. It was the imagination that propelled them to action. And it was also the desire to express their love for themselves and their love for their families and their love for their communities that propelled them into action. So I'm not here to talk about civic engagement, but rather I am here to talk about love and imagination. Love and imagination are possible when we are in community. This is why being here to allow ourselves to listen to 3 days of music is such a gift, because we are allowing ourselves to feed our imagination, to give ourselves energy, to remind us what it feels like to be in community, even if we have to do it over the internet. And when we think about the moments in history that transformed our country and transformed the world, we have to think about them not as moments that happen to a mass of people, but rather as moments that happen to one person. So that one person who made a choice to show up to a suffragist meeting, that person was probably a woman. That person probably had children. That person probably had lots of dishes to do. And that person made a choice that was in service of her vision and an experience that she had yet had in her life. Something that she imagined was possible, but she had yet to experience. When we think about emancipation and what it took for people enslaved in this country to be free, it took a tremendous amount of courage, willingness to fight, willingness to resist the violence. It took a lot of pain, and it took a lot of effort. And it was the work of generations. When we think about the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, it took from people a lot of courage to stand up to Jim Crow laws in the South and racist violence in the North. And it took community to replenish the energy, and it took acts of incredible resilience to show up again and again. We don't have to wait for our moment to arrive. Our moment is here. We are living in a moment that will fundamentally set the course for this country. And I want to ask you all to use that clarity that you have when you are taking care of someone you love, and the courage that you have, the moment of courage that you have had. All of us have had moments of courage where we had to walk past our fear and our perhaps our shame, perhaps our uncertainty to do something difficult. And I want you to remember that when you do that, when you do something powerful and courageous, other people around you will do it too. And the reason why I know this is our moment is because over the last several years, we have witnessed many displays of courage and solidarity, whether it was the millions of people who marched on the streets after inauguration in 2017, whether it was the thousands and thousands of people who showed up to protest the separation of families at the border, whether it was the thousands of people who fed one another and brought food to people after hurricanes or during the COVID crisis, or the thousands and thousands of people who knocked on doors to elect a new Congress, or the thousands and thousands of people who who are showing up every single day right now to make sure that others can go out to vote. All of these are acts of courage and solidarity that contain the seed of optimism and transformation of our country. Whenever I am feeling sad or depleted or demoralized, I go back to a speech that I heard a few years ago, a speech by a civil rights activist whose name is Valerie Kaur. She is an activist, civil rights attorney, and she talks about the history of her family. Her grandfather arrived in the early 1900s to the US from India, and he was thrown in jail for several months. And she says, you know, he came here pursuing his dreams, his aspiration, and I have to imagine that in the darkness of that cell, he had to cultivate a seed of optimism. I have to imagine that in the darkness of that cell, he had to reinterpret the darkness. We are for sure living through a moment of great darkness when brown bodies are considered illegal, trans bodies are considered immoral, Black bodies are considered dangerous, women's bodies are considered someone else's property. It is a moment of darkness. But I have to imagine that in the darkness of that cell, my grandfather was able to find a seed of optimism by reinterpreting that darkness. And she continues to say, what if the darkness of this moment is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if America is not a country dying or falling apart, but rather a country waiting to be born? What if our ancestors, those who survived or perhaps lost their lives in genocide, in Jim Crow, those who lost their lives to poverty, those who survived moments of famine, what if those ancestors are whispering in our ear, you are brave, you are brave? What does the midwife say to us when we are giving birth? She says, breathe. So tonight we will breathe joy and optimism, because then she says, push. Because if we don't breathe, we die. If we don't push, we die. But if we breathe with our energy, our activism, our votes, and our actions and our stories, we will bring into existence, all be free, a country where we can all live with dignity. So tonight we will breathe with music and celebration, and tomorrow we will push with our activism, with our efforts to call legislators, to invite them to join them in our courage, with our efforts to organize in our communities to make sure that people can vote and go out to vote, and with our efforts to make sure that this pursuit of a country that is more just, a country that is where the promise of freedom and democracy is available to all of us, is a pursuit that we will dedicate part of our energy and time to. So that the people who are younger, who are watching us, who are trying to decipher the choices that we have, realize that we believe ourselves to be courageous people, powerful people who can transform the world. And we devote time of our part of our days and our nights and our energy and our brains to the pursuit of collective power together, and collective transformation of this country. So this is not a very traditional definition of civic engagement, but it is a definition that contains not just the tactics of civic engagement, of calling your legislator or making sure that people go out to vote or voting yourself, but rather the purpose of civic engagement, which is the idea that we bring democracy alive with our efforts, and that we use democracy to take care of one another and the generations that will come after us. And we do it because we believe that we all have freedom in our hearts and deserve dignity in our lives. So with that, I'm going to now stop talking and join the conversation with my sisters here, Jennifer and Dr. Yellow.
Hello, yes. Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, I cannot express enough gratitude to Ana Maria Archila for joining us tonight here in Lincoln, virtually at least. And in my tribal language, we would say Naish, or thank you very much for your words. I feel so full from hearing them. Thank you very much. And joining us right now, we need to welcome very, very happily Miss Jennifer Epps-Addison, who is the president and co-director of the Center for Popular Democracy. Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I am joining y'all from my car because I had this beautiful backdrop, yellow and cactus backdrop. It's 110 degrees outside in Los Angeles right now. So unfortunately, I cannot sit out by the beautiful backdrop and I have to join you from my car where there's air conditioning.
Well, I'm glad you are in air conditioning, and it sounds like you need that out there. So I'm very glad, and you're safe. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for everybody who's joining us on this live event. It's great. I hear we have friends and we would say relatives joining us from different countries as well across the globe. It's so exciting to meet you. I am Collete Yellow Robe, or my name is Vanhayat, which means ceremonial woman in the Cheyenne language. And it's a pleasure to moderate here tonight. So if Jennifer and Ana Maria don't mind, we're going to continue to discuss some of the topics that were brought up in your keynote address, and of course explore other issues that we encounter in our community landscapes across not just our country, but the globe, of course. And so to those of you who are here listening live, we will be happy to take questions from the audience in about 30 minutes or so. That's okay. And what you can do is you can just drop those questions into the comments, and we will be happy to attend to those. So we're just going to dive right in, if you don't mind, and we're going to start with talking about how we have learned to strengthen our communities. And so in both of your experiences, how are communities strengthened? What advice do you have for that? How can we advance movements for change by using the strengths in our communities?
What a beautiful question to start with. I want to share gratitude for the beautiful land acknowledgement that was given prior to Ana Maria's keynote. And I think I'll start my response to that question with an acknowledgement of Black and Latinx and Chicano and Indigenous communities and our shared struggle, our shared legacies of colonization and genocide, but also of resistance, to Ana Maria's point in her keynote, of imagining a world that did not yet exist for us, that still does not yet exist for us, of, really generation after generation reinventing our culture and the impact that we want to have on the world, and of building communities, right, of action that take the individual experience of trauma and harm, of exclusion, isolation, and criminalization, and transform that into a shared collective vision for a world in which being Black or Indigenous, means having the ability to thrive within our cultures and holding our shared traditions, not a shared experience of being the most criminalized communities in the country, right? A culture in which, we base what we consider to be a booming economy not on the stock market or how many billionaires exist within our country, but on how many families have what they need to survive, how many people can keep a roof over their head, how many folks can go to the doctor when they're sick without worrying about the bill that comes afterwards. This is how we begin to transform our country, and how we begin to build that community, is really through both acknowledging our shared struggle, but really through telling our stories about what it is we believe our people and our families truly deserve.
Yes, yes. I'm giving you a standing ovation in my parlor right now. Thank you. That phenomenal feedback and answer for us, or advice, insight. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Ana Maria, would you like to address the question about our communities, our beloved communities?
I mean, I think everything that Jen has said is what I believe. I also think that like building community requires listening to our desire for connection, for validation, for purpose, and for freedom. And all of those things are possible in relationship with others. And so it is as much about ourselves as kind of individuals as it is about collective. And I think it is that in order to build kind of communities of action and joyful communities, we have to also kind of like separate ourselves from the circumstances in some ways, like understand that our desire to live with dignity is right, it's appropriate in its own right, and our outrage to injustice is appropriate. It's an appropriate response, and that our outrage when we see our people hurting is an appropriate response, and that both holding the joy and the pain and the outrage is how we validate people as individuals and people as collectives, and how we both build the energy to change those circumstances, but also remember that it is our right to stand in our dignity and in our power.
Yes, yes, I feel that. Wow, very moved. That part. That. Wow. That would. Thank you for sharing that very much. We'll move on. That was a wow. Just thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, unity. We go for unity and solidarity, of course, in our causes and our efforts toward affecting change or disrupting our systems of power and oppression. So from your professional and amazing experiences, both of you, in your incredible beings, I feel like I'm looking at two very radiant souls right now. What barriers to unity do you feel most disrupt progress in the movements that you've worked with, or others?
So there are two things that I'm reminded of when you ask me this question. So the first is, I've been organizing for 20 plus years. The first demonstration I ever helped to organize, I was 15 years old, and it was a walkout to demand equitable school funding of our public schools. And for 20 years, I've organized, in a way that seeks to both reduce harms to our communities. So we pass what we can get past given the power we have, because we want to see less people suffering and we want to see less people die. But there have been many times in which what that means is that the people who are actually suffering the most are the ones who get left off the table at the end of the day. And so, when I hear that, I think of Martin Luther King Jr., who said, that the white liberal is more dangerous oftentimes than the member of the KKK, right? The person who we know and who outwardly tells us they stand against us, because the white liberal is more comfortable, right, with respectability, right, and is more concerned with that, right, with comfort, than they are with progress. And so for 20 years, I think in each time in which we've had to make a negotiation that excludes some worker from the end of the bargain, that leaves a community behind, that doesn't actually give people the resources they need to thrive, I feel that call really deeply. The second thing that really comes to mind is immediately after this administration rose to power, Rashad Robinson, who's the director of an incredible online Black organizing space called Color of Change, gave a speech that I got to attend. And he said that, folks could learn to hate Trumpism, right? The idea of sort of, undermining of our democratic ideals, but that they could never learn to love Black people. And the idea about that is that, in this idea of resistance, we can't make it about an individual. And I think this is really important for us to understand in politics, right? That we can't make it about an individual. It really is about, what are we doing to lift up and to hold firm and to advance our core values, right? Because if we change, right, if we transform the country simply by changing who's leading it, but we don't transform the white nationalism and white supremacy, the economic anxiety, the struggling communities that are told that they're should be pitted against each other instead of brought together, right? And if we don't transform the fact that every time we make an advancement, say with the Affordable Care Act, right, where we include some people, but our analysis isn't to include everyone, our analysis doesn't start with the people who are struggling the most, then that's not real unity, right? That's a false solidarity that's rooted in your own self-interest, not in a collective value. And so at CPD Action, our network of grassroots organizations in 34 states said enough of this, enough pitting the South against the Midwest and the East against the, West Coast, enough pitting Black communities against Indigenous communities, against Latinx communities, enough pitting young people against our elders. Instead, let us build a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-geography movement that is rooted in the idea that all of us deserve the freedom to thrive, not just some of us. And that means that for our organizing, we have to fight hardest for the communities that are struggling the most, because our freedom will come if those who are struggling even more than us have theirs. So that's how we think about solidarity, how we think about unity. We understand that it can't be for the most privileged. It can't be centered on those of us who have the most. It has to be rooted in how do we transform the world so those who have the least all of a sudden really are centered in position to thrive.
Amazing, beautiful. Again, thank you, Jennifer, so much. And in that, I heard just the amazing ideas and action steps to overcome those barriers. So we appreciate that. That just was an entire wealth of knowledge right there. And I want to give a chance for Ana Maria, if you would like to contribute as well with that question, talking about, our barriers to unity and solidarity, and also how have you overcome those as well?
Yeah, I mean, unity is not in itself helpful if what is achieved by unity is not enjoyed by everyone. So we have to see the world as it is, have the clarity to stare at the reality of how power is distributed in our society, in our communities, how who is able to kind of live without worrying about the next paycheck or whether or not we'll be able to make rent, and who has been included and who has been excluded. And the fact is that the history of this country is one of constant struggle by the people excluded to be included in the promise, and by the people included in the promise to resist that inclusion, right? So the Constitution was drafted by a small group of people. Even though it has very lofty language, it is still a promise yet to be realized, right? Equal protection under the law is still a promise to be realized. So if we are talking about unity of purpose, of working together across difference, across interests to pursue the inclusion of more people in the enjoyment of material things like a good paycheck and access to healthcare, or access to power and representation, then that unity is very helpful. But unity to kind of demobilize us and say, let's not rock the boat, is actually not helpful, because it doesn't help us get closer to have to enjoy like a life of dignity. So conflict and struggle and difference is necessary for the transformation of a society. Anyone who says that it's better not to have conflict is just wanting to enjoy a moment of comfort and ease, and that's not helpful. If we fundamentally believe that we have a role to play in transforming our society to make it more just, so I think solidarity is a really important thing. Solidarity as expressed in people showing up for one another and not really limiting what the other person or group of people desires, but actually saying, I will show up to help you in advancing what you are pursuing. That kind of solidarity is also, in the same way that conflict is necessary for transformation, solidarity is necessary for transformation.
Yes.
And what I have seen over the last 3 years and over the moments of social movement is thousands and sometimes millions of people displaying solidarity and courage and being willing to be uncomfortable and being willing to move through conflict to achieve a level of unity of purpose. And that I think we have seen in full display in the struggle for Black lives that we are living through. We are seeing it in full display in the ways that people have shown up for one another during the COVID crisis, despite and very much in contrast with the inaction of our government, and especially the inaction of and kind of the passivity of many in the federal government in the face of so much suffering in our community. So conflict and solidarity, I lean into those more than kind of flat, placid, calm unity.
Right, excellent, excellent. I was sure to include solidarity. You know, in a few minutes we're going to start talking about like imagining, and as I listen to both of you, I feel inspired myself, imagining our futures, and it's about our generations not even realized or actualized yet. So this is incredible to hear this, and thank you. That's how inspiring you are as I listen to you. You know, Ana Maria and both Jennifer alluded to this in their comments and responses. So we're just going to go in and call things out the way they should be sometimes, and we're going to talk about status quo now. And oftentimes in movements, causes, you know, our activism, how do you find ways to battle or take on, or as Ana Maria was alluding to, confront the apathy, or sometimes people who are fine, maybe they've been conditioned. A lot of us were conditioned to feel okay with the status quo or whatnot. And how do we build upon that to move toward change?
Wow. I just like Ashe. It's like such a deep, I need to take a deep breath as I think about that. I mean, I think the first thing that I will say is that for many people who live in a state of constant struggle, whether it's Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, whether it's, you know, poor folks and working class folks, you know, people living with disabilities, LGBT and gender nonconforming folks, their lives and their experience with democracy is a constant set of disappointments, failures, and exclusions, right? That their relationship, as Ana Maria was explaining, to what democracy means is a constant struggle and fight to be included. And so then every 4 years or so, when we, tell people, no, but really this one is the most consequential election of your time, right? Because I've been hearing that for 20 years now. What happens is that they go and they do that vote. And then when it comes time for that change in the solutions that were promised, somehow they're yet again left out. And so I think we have to see apathy not as a what is wrong with you, why aren't you participating, but as a symptom of a system that is operating as intended to suppress the participation of those that would require it to make dramatic changes. And so when we begin to look at this not as a as Ana Maria said, a flaccid allowing something to happen to you, but instead as a very active, I am shaping the world that I desire. I am governing and creating ownership in the institutions that impact my lives. I am disallowing those who would set limitations on what's possible for me or my people. I am disallowing their power, and instead I am using my imagination and our collective imagination to build out what that world looks like for myself. I think though, that's the moment in which we really see transformation occur. But I think we just, let's be clear, folks who sat home in 2016, right, they weren't just sitting home. Many of them were actively suppressed through various tactics. And for those who made the choice not to go to vote, often it was because they felt like neither of those choices would significantly change their lives. And so we need to really offer something better, and we need to push our politics in a direction that says, why is it that the largest constituency of voters in the country are people who don't vote? What does that mean for our democracy, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And again, I'm words like liberating, asserting voice are coming to mind. That absolutely wonderful, Jennifer. And thank you for stating it very clearly that there is a new way to imagine our futures and the action that it will take to do that. Ana Maria, what's your that word itself?
Yeah, so I think that we are constantly having to battle so many messages to demobilize ourselves, right? The messages that say, you know what, your vote doesn't matter, or nothing's going to change, or nothing has changed. And, we have met a lot of evidence in our lives to show that, to prove that point. But I think that apathy is really combated through connection and through invitation. What I have seen and what I see every day is people being tremendously courageous and tremendously resilient. The fact that people are figuring out how to survive in the midst of this pandemic is proof of our resilience alone. The fact that in the midst of this pandemic, people are taking care of their loved ones is proof of our resilience. And I have been organizing most of my kind of organizing work has been inside the immigrant rights movement. And I came here when I was 17, came to the US when I was 17, and kind of felt very much like this country is not my home. And it wasn't until I became part of a movement, it wasn't until I was surrounded by people who were in motion, whether it was about getting more teachers in schools, or whether it was about protecting people from evictions, or getting people out to vote. It wasn't until I was surrounded by people that I realized, oh, this country is my home. It is through struggle that I make this country my home. It is through fighting for the people I love that I build both a sense of personal purpose and a sense of community and belonging. And if we find people in our lives who are, you know, who would be described as apathetic, I would ask, like, do you feel invited to join? And I would make that invitation. I think in many ways, people feel most purposeful when they are in connection with others. And connection means that I see you. I see you with your concerns. I see you with your experience. I see you with your aspirations, with your dreams. And I believe that you deserve those dreams to be realized. And I will stand by you in the best way I can to make you feel purposeful and to help you feel a sense of belonging and community. Because without that, it's the invitation to not be apathetic is too abstract and too remote and lacking in substance. It is really both in the sense that we belong together and we belong in our communities, and our communities deserve to have the things that allow us to live without fear of want, or fear of violence, or fear of exclusion. It is that makes civic engagement of many forms necessary and purposeful and important. So this is why the messages that we are hearing right now of, you know, the ballots are not real or are so dangerous, because they demobilize us and help and like make us retreat, when really what we need in this moment is to lean on each other and to feel connected to one another. Because it is true we are living through a global pandemic. It is true climate change is like showing up at our doorstep. It is all of these things, all of these material realities are real. If we are disconnected from other people that give us a sense that we exist in community, then it's very hard to say, well, just show up to vote. That vote needs to live in the context of a purpose that is both personal and collective.
Yes, absolutely. Again, I'm another standing ovation. I hear clarity, accuracy, and reframing sort of I would say, these weaponized concepts that have been used against the very communities that we are so dedicated and committed to in our activism. So thank you so much. But speaking of more community engagement, wanted to shift gears. And when you're working in collaboration with people and groups, you know, different groups of people or causes, can you tell us or talk to us a little bit about how you build consensus around an issue or cause, or whatever the case may be? I'm not sure what will come to mind, but I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back quickly to a little bit of the last question, because here's and it leads into this question of how we build community and consensus, but here's the reality. You know, the best way to ensure someone who wasn't planning on voting will go out and participate in the democracy and cast a ballot is if someone they know, love, trust, and care about asks them to, right? And so if each of us were just committed to getting our aunts and our cousins and our uncles and our nieces and our nephews and our neighbors, right, out to vote, and to really holding their hand through the process so that they can make a plan and have it executed and have that vote counted, we would have staggering voter turnout, right? If every person who was denied the right to vote because they have a previous felony on their record, if their people, if their community members, if their own family members would commit to voting for them, probably, I'm not going to make up numbers here, but we could significantly increase voter participation in the country. And so, what happens is people feel uncomfortable doing that. We've been raised not to talk about politics. I'm from Wisconsin. They call it Midwestern nice, right? We've been raised to not have these conversations with people, or because we think we have political disagreements or something, and we feel uncomfortable doing that. So I think it's really important to know that the best chance we have at transforming the country through political participation is if you talk to the people you love and care about. But absent that, right, that's where community organizations who are bringing a lot of folks who might be too scared to talk to their own family members, but see some safety in talking to somebody else's cousin, right? You talk to my cousin and I'll talk to yours, and that way if it doesn't go well, there's no awkwardness at the dinner table. So that's the next best step. And so that's why joining a community organization, and for those of you, if you don't have organizations, that are local to you that you want to participate with, but you really want to help people get out the vote, or maybe you're interested in particular states that you're not currently living in right now, but you want a way to be able to connect and help people participate, certainly you can, reach out to us at the Center for Popular Democracy. We have a voter guardian program that we're running, which is really about making a connection to particularly Black and Brown voters in states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Florida, and to, really asking them, hey, do you have a plan to vote? Are you registered? Have you checked your registration? Is it still valid? And really going through all the steps to help guard their vote. Because what we know this year is it won't be just enough to get a record number of people casting their ballots. We actually have to do the protection work on the other side. This is the critical civic engagement and follow-up to make sure that every one of those votes actually gets counted.
Yes, that part. Thank you. Yes, Jennifer, absolutely. Yes. Ana Maria, do you have any phenomenal insight, much like Jennifer? And I heard in your keynote, of course, similar concepts. Anything to add for us?
No, I think Jen said it. Jen and I work together all the time. And when she talks, I'm always so mesmerized. And so I'm like, what she said, exactly what she said. So yes, what she said.
Well, I feel the same. I imagine being me. I have double mesmerization going on here, and it's phenomenal. And I just cannot thank you enough. This is just, it's amazing. This is dissertations of knowledge and wisdom and care, which we often don't see sometimes in conversations. So I just cannot stress that enough. Okay, we are actually getting questions from the audience, so that's exciting. I'm going to visit one more, and then I think I'll shift us into those questions. I think it's important to hear from those who are, supporting us and supporting you in your work. So one last question I wanted to get to before we shift is, can you tell us about a time, we have different groups with different political ideologies, that you collaborated with such group or someone, and how did you work together to achieve the goal or the outcome or the end result?
I think that's a really great question. I mean, I think the first thing, just foundationally on that piece, is you talked about the end result. And so there are many roads, right? And there are many paths, and there are many interests. But I think the question of how do we get to defining a shared end result is really important, because I might, diverge from you as I take one path, but at the end of the day, are we trying to meet up in the same place? And so building a shared ideology and a shared vision for the future that we're trying to build, I think is really, really critical. And, oftentimes at CPD, we're working with communities who have been, raised in generations of conflict with each other, who are told that they're the problem, right? We're working with groups in Indiana who are trying to figure out, how do we build a working class organization of folks who are working class that's also combating anti-immigrant sentiment and anti-Blackness, right? We are working with groups in, the state of Wisconsin, that is a state that's 91% white, and yet they're, organizing Black folks who live in that state and have to both understand what is it needed, what is the organizing for Black liberation, and then how do we build a shared relationship to, white folks who are living outstate and in rural communities who we will need on our side if we hope to change policy at a state level. And so I think our network is a really great example. 2/3 of the organizations in our network are led by Black or brown folks and by women of color. And, they represent, all types of communities from, some of the largest cities in the country like Los Angeles to, rural communities in West Virginia. And I think, again, it's not that every issue is all important, right? I think Ana Maria's points about showing up for each other and recognizing each other's struggles, are really important. I think the other piece about it is, even though every issue isn't necessarily your issue, what are you doing to either be additive and supportive of folks who are working on that, or are you undermining it? And I think, I'll just give one quick example of what I mean. The uprisings that have occurred over this summer and continue to occur in many communities across this country around state violence and police violence, have transformed our vision of sustained protest. And in fact, Black Lives Matter is now the largest social movement this country has ever seen. And so because of the impact of those folks in the streets, because of those folks advancing a bold demand, a clear and unapologetically bold demand, defund the police, right? It has forced the discourse to move in that direction, right? So prior to defund the police being the central demand, you could not get a number of elected officials and corporations. There was still the NFL, right? We couldn't even say Black Lives Matter. Then all of a sudden, as this civil unrest began and people began to own their power and demand that an institution be fundamentally reimagined, it became, oh yeah, of course Black Lives Matter. Let's paint it on every street. Let's name some street signs. Let's, for those in Congress, kneel in kente cloth, right? Black Lives Matter, because there's a fear of the power that was growing of this multiracial movement demanding liberation of Black people in this country. And so what we have now is people are owning the language of the movement, the idea of reimagining policing, but still working to undermine the central demand, which is a redistribution of the trillions of dollars spent on criminalizing Black communities, Indigenous communities, and other communities of color, right? A reimagining of that and a repurposing of that so that instead we're investing in those communities. We're investing in healthcare and housing and trauma care and community-owned solutions to violence, right? So I think that's the real central question here is, if you're saying Black Lives Matter, and then in the next sentence, you're saying, but I think we need more police, or let's give the police more money for better training, you're missing the point of the movement, and you weren't listening to the people who were really putting their bodies on the line in the streets. And so it's like, how do I understand that even if my relationship to police is different, maybe, Ana Maria and I both share the trauma of being survivors of sexual assault. We have neither one of us chose to report those assaults to the police because of the relationship our communities have and a whole host of other reasons, right? But that doesn't undermine the fact that there may have been a survivor where the police were helpful, but it does force us to ask the question, if the majority of survivors do not trust that institution, why are we giving it trillions of dollars of resources in their name, right? Shouldn't we ask those communities, what would make you feel safe? What do you wish existed when you were a victim in order to help you become a survivor, or in order to prevent that trauma in the first place? And so that, I think that's really what we're trying to do in a moment of great harm reduction, right? In a moment of, you know, so much pain happening, we're trying to really ask those of us to really stand up and say, how do I aid? How do I help? How do I not undermine? And if I'm not directly impacted, how do I follow the leadership and the vision of those who are?
Yes, absolutely. That incredible. And you know, I unfortunately, being a Cheyenne woman, Native woman, I share in that statistic of being a sexual assault survivor as well. And unfortunately, I don't remember everything. And so I fight because there are some of us who we just don't know what exactly happened. So I do absolutely walk in solidarity with you. And I always respect and appreciate people who are owning their story, and I think we should do the same. So I have no words of just I have to turn to poetry to write about the both of you. I wanted to shift into the questions, amazing questions that have come in. The first one refers to the darkness that we talked about earlier. Question 1, when you see someone who's dragged down by the darkness, what's something that you do to lift their spirits?
I think we have to be often the thing that is most transformative is actually feeling accompanied. So not trying to be kind of forced out of a state of an emotional state that is just real. But rather having someone join and kind of be by our side. So I think that acknowledging that the darkness is appropriate and that having a sense of kind of disarming and powerlessness is appropriate. And as is also remembering that we are not just what we are in a particular moment, but actually we are made up of lots of experiences, many of which are experiences where we felt in our power, and saying, I am with you here, and I also will be with you when you tap into that experience of connection and power. I also think it's some of the, I don't know, like as a mother, I have learned that I only make things worse when I like get, when I feel like my my task or my job is to change how my children are feeling, and that just like creates an experience of resistance. But when I can just sit by their side and just kind of like write it out with them and say, I totally understand this is like true for you right now, but I'm waiting for you on the other side too. That is like the way that like they both feel not just trampled on, but like seen and respected, and actually supported to get to the other side. I think that is true for communities as well. And it is true for our friends, and it's true for our family. So, you know, not, I think it's important for us to respect people's like sense of, you know, people's true experience of the moment, and also to help little by little participate in allowing them to remember that they are powerful, and encouraging not to miss moments to be in their power, whether it is a meeting, whether it is a protest, whether it is election day. I think we both have to, like, we have to kind of see reality as it exists and kind of see the possibility that awaits. And that's true, I think, in relationships that are like respectful, right? And it is true in what we demand, right? Like when I guess I'll go back to that elevator moment with Senator Flake for a second. And the thing that was kind of one of the things that was so captivating about that interaction was, we didn't show it in the video, but Maria Gallagher, the young woman who was with me in the elevator, was like trying to speak through her tears. And she was yelling at the senator who she had never met. We had never met him. Yelling at him and saying, like, look at me and tell me that what happened to me doesn't matter. And that is like the essence of what social movements are doing, have done, saying, look at us and tell us that what happened to us doesn't matter. So we have to acknowledge harm. We have to acknowledge the emotions that accompany personal harm and generational harm. We have to acknowledge that our democracy doesn't often deliver for us. And then we have to, only by like really saying, you're right, like what you're feeling is totally appropriate, validating that, then we can move into a state of repair and solution. So I think we have to do that in the relationships with people who we feel are demoralized and perhaps appropriately so behaving with apathy. And we have to do it in our communities, and we have to do it in our efforts to engage elected officials and in our efforts to transform our reality.
That was very powerful, very wise. Just the wisdom coming out. Thank you. Jennifer, do you have a response to that question for us?
Well, obviously, I want to say ditto. Just a couple of things. One is, as individuals, I think it's our job to constantly reinforce each other's humanity. I think of the great actor Chadwick Boseman, who tragically passed of cancer, and the fact that, you know, that in the last year of his life, he'd really reduced his public appearances because of how unkind the comments on the internet were. And this is a man who gave us some of the, you know, most classic and emotional things. You know, what do I do when I'm down? I watch the Black Panther, right? So he gave us a movie while he was sick that my children and I watch when we want to imagine a better world. So the first is really recognize each other's humanity. And then, you know, I think when, you know, when our people are in need, I think, you know, I come from Black tradition, and food is incredibly important in our culture. And right now there are, you know, tens of millions of families that are really food insecure. And so I think one way to help pull people out of their darkness is if you have the ability to help feed them and, you know, share a meal with them, that you know, can have a transformative effect of just giving somebody both a little, you know, care and love, a little TLC, but also the burden of how am I going to feed myself or my folks off.
Yes, powerful. Yeah, thank you for reminding us of our king. You know, thank you very much, Chadwick Boseman, and again, the futurism, the imagination, the reclamation, the innovation. That was just very, very amazing. Okay, so I'm looking.
I apologize. I hear my mic was blocked a little bit, so
yeah.
I realized my earpiece wasn't actually in my ear; it was on my lap. So sorry about that.
You know, I'm moderating, Jennifer. I'm not going to call you out. I have too much respect for you. But if you would like to, you can reiterate. Of course, feel free to reiterate anything. It was a very powerful statement. Very powerful.
Well, I just apologize if anybody didn't hear it. But I mean, I basically was just saying I love food and it always makes me feel better. So, you know, if somebody feels like they're in that ditch, sharing a meal with them, breaking some bread with them, giving them a baked good, I mean, it never fails, at least in that moment, to provide a little relief.
Yep.
True. I should have said that.
Fact, we're totally, and it's kind and caring and simple, you know, and should be done more. I don't think we can overdo that one. Okay, so we have around 7 minutes left, and I'm going to have to make a call here. We have 3 more questions that came in from the audience, but I also want to be mindful of time because we want to be respectful.
Do you want to share them all and then we can try to answer to them?
Right. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I was just about to ask you that. I wanted to see if Lee could put those in chat for us, and then you could maybe pick the one that, you feel you're drawn to, your soul, you're speaking to on that one. So I'm not sure if Lee could do that for us, but I could also type them in. I'm a mother, Ana Maria. I can multitask, believe me, even though that's a myth. In my head, I'm doing it. So there's question 1. Back from Lee that it's just a bit of a technical thing there. So we are going to second question is about self-care and how you take care of yourselves.
Yeah, so I'm gonna read the questions as how do you remain encouraged after and amidst disappointment? One is about self-care. How are taking care of yourselves and those around you so you do not burn out? Oh God. Very important question.
I'm just the messenger. So, and then the last one has to do with the internet access during this time. As you know, I'm sure we are acutely aware. I teach mostly first-generation college students, and that is just, it's a reality.
Yeah.
Well, okay, here we go.
Why don't I start with the internet access question? Avoid the self-care one. Ana may have better tips than me. Just to say, we have been organizing now for 8 months around building substantial federal relief, to the COVID crisis. We were able to pass the first relief bill, which provided an extra $600 for those who are on unemployment and a host of other, so the first $1,200 relief check to a select number of people living in the country. We obviously advocated for something different, right? We fought for, we wanted to see $2,000 a month to everybody in the country, including undocumented communities. And we wanted to see it continue throughout the pandemic like we saw in other countries like Canada or the United Kingdom or Australia. And access to internet is a big part of that. So, 5 months ago, the HEROES Act was passed through Congress, and it is sitting on the desk of Mitch McConnell in the Senate, and it has yet to be taken up. But one of the provisions in that act is access to broadband across the country. Truthfully, things like healthcare, things like broadband, things like water, clean water, right? These should be public utilities, right? These are utilities that people must have to survive and definitely need to thrive. And so I think access to broadband, particularly rural broadband, but universal access to broadband is really, truly in the 21st century a civil rights issue. So that's how we've been thinking about it. And we have a bill that is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk called the HEROES Act that would provide resources to states and localities to provide broadband access also to schools. And so, folks should call and contact their senators and their elected officials and ask, why is it that you are trying to jam through a Supreme Court nomination when you for 5 months have done nothing to bring a relief bill, a COVID relief bill to the floor?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for reminding us about the critical HEROES Act. Appreciate that, Jennifer. Well, I think we're going to be able to probably tactfully avoid the self-care question because I'm sure we all, can have our input on that one. But we have only a couple minutes left, but I thought it was so critical to thank both of you again. Naish, thank you so much. It is just uplifting. And I think you bring a lot of illumination and clarity to what's going on in society. And for that, this is a gift. I believe this will be found on the YouTube video as well, that I will certainly encourage people to view. And it's going to be a sustainable gift. And we will work on that HEROES Act that you talked about, Jennifer, of course, absolutely. So I'm going to applaud
Thank
both
you for
of
your incredible facilitation. Thank you.
Oh, well, yeah.
And can I say, the only way that I have found to take care of myself is to make breakfast for myself and the people I love. That's it. That's the beginning and the end of my self-care practice. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Good conversation is how I feed myself. So thank you for tonight.
Thank you.
And stay safe, everybody. Stay safe, Jennifer, and cool out there, out in LA. And Ana Maria, you as well.
Thank you.
We need you, and we appreciate you.
And enjoy the next several days of music. I'm so glad to be part of this with both of you.
Yes, absolutely. Good night.
Night. Bye.